The Johannesburg High Court yesterday ruled on the reopened inquest into the death of anti-apartheid activist Dr. Neil Aggett. This comes after a lengthy inquiry was held back in 2020 to investigate the circumstances behind his death. After more than 2 months in custody, Aggett was discovered hanging in a jail cell at the then John Vorster Square in February 1982. Judge Motsamai Makume, who handed down the verdict, saying the young doctor was killed by apartheid security force police. Joining us now is Ahmed Timol's nephew, Imtiaz Cajee, to discuss the matter further with us. Mr. Cajee, a pleasure to have you on the program this morning. Now, the Johannesburg High Court found that the activist Neil Aggett was indeed killed by apartheid security police. What does this mean, not just for the family affected by, but other families who are demanding justice for the deaths of their loved ones at the hands of apartheid police?
Good morning, Ntantla. No, it's a welcome relief that the belief that the Aggett and many other families have had, that their loved ones who were detained by the apartheid regime never committed suicide, or it was never induced suicide, but that they were gruesomely tortured and they were killed in police detention. But let's not forget that yesterday the judgment was issued on the Dr. Neil Aggett inquest. But the Aggett inquest was held duly with that of Ernest Dipali, so we eagerly await the outcome of the Dipali judgment in Ntantla. But this, once again, reopens very painful wounds. That, it's not a figment of our imagination that our loved ones were detained, that they were tortured, and the cruelty of the apartheid regime. But for me, what is striking is that apartheid-era perpetrators in a democratic South Africa, under oath, continue to blatantly lie. And this was depicted in the Timol inquest in 2017, and the same in the Aggett inquest, which was clearly demonstrated yesterday by Judge Makume, that they take absolutely no responsibility. And I think this is the thing that irks many families.
Right.
That we continue reaching out to apartheid-era perpetrators for them to come forward, to clear their conscience, to take responsibility of their actions, like the late Paul Erasmus. And what we get in return in Ntantla is total denial and an insult to our integrity.
Now, as a follow-up, the ruling, of course, came after a drawn-out inquest was established back in 2020 to take a closer look at the circumstances leading up to his death. Now, Aggett was found hanging in the jail cell at the then John Vorster Square back in 1982 after spending more than 2 months in custody. What was your own assessment of the circumstances of his death and some of the revelations that were found in court?
Look, for me in Ntantla, it's not surprising at all. I've for the last 26 years of my life, I've been investigating the death of my beloved uncle, Ahmed Timol. And in so doing, I've had access and interactions with many families throughout the country. And this was clearly the modus operandi, starting in 1963 with Luxmat in Luli. That activists or any opposition to the apartheid regime resulted in anti-apartheid activists being held in detention with no legal representation. They were tortured. Security police had impunity of doing whatever they liked. There was collusion between the security police, the state pathologists, the judiciary at that time, including politicians. So the Neil Aggett inquest has once again confirmed what families have been reiterating for many decades, that we cannot continue believing the police version of events and the apartheid-era inquest that ruled that our loved ones had committed suicide. But we are convinced that they were all murdered in police detention, and it is imperative that those inquests must be reopened and those held accountable and complicit must be charged accordingly.
It's quite interesting that you mentioned that there appears to be this common theme in the Ahmed Timol case where authorities at the time also claimed that your uncle had committed suicide.
No, most certainly. I mean, they insult the integrity of our martyrs. They come up with a version in the Aggett and Timol inquest, where security police argued that instead of betraying their comrades, they committed suicide. So they murder our loved ones, and on top of that, they insult the integrity, which has always been impeccable. The cover-ups. I mean, continuously, Judge Makume, in his judgment, referred to the lies and the cover-ups. So this is a consistent thread from 1963, going all the way till the early 90s when anti-apartheid activists were detained and tortured in police detention in Ntantla.
Now, this clearly also reminds us or points to the brutality of the apartheid regime.
No, most certainly. And you see, we have been forced in a particular direction where we are told we must forget about the past. We must make inroads and use the gains of the PRC and build this country and have nation building and reconciliation. And the reality is with who?
Right.
My conclusion in Tlantla is that apartheid-era perpetrators are very comfortable to see the implosion within the ANC when comrade continues fighting against comrade. But when you bring up the painful past and you ask them and you expect them to be held accountable by the elected government of the day, we become a nuisance.
Right, right.
We become infatuated by pursuing the truth. And the reality is that apartheid-era operatives continue handling members within the liberation movement in a democratic South Africa. And nobody talks about this, and that is why the reopening of this inquest must continue, and our past must be dealt with. It cannot be brushed under the carpet, and the country can only move forward once we, in a professional and in an honorable manner, restore the dignity of comrades such as Ahmed Timol and Neil Aggett and many, many other martyrs who have died fighting for our freedom in this country.
Now, Mr. Cajee, as we wrap up, does this then not also spark this renewed hope, especially for families who are still demanding answers about the deaths or the circumstances around the deaths of their loved ones?
No, most certainly. I mean, you know, in 2017, the family of Nephew approached Judge Motley, begging for their matter to be reheard. Mabelani had also died at the notorious John Vorster Square police station. And subsequently, his father and his brother Lesh had passed on. And this is a common thread, that as families keep on asking and keep on patiently begging and waiting, apartheid-era perpetrators like João Rodrigues continue to pass on, and the NPA is demonstrated in the investigations into Neville Els and Seth Sons have clearly demonstrated that there's absolutely no political will on their part to ensure that apartheid-era perpetrators are held accountable for their actions in Tlantla.
That was Imtiaz Cajee, the nephew of Ahmed Timol, reacting to the Johannesburg High Court's ruling yesterday on the inquest on the death of anti-apartheid activist Dr. Neil Aggett. Of course, the court finding there that he did not commit suicide and was indeed killed by security forces or apartheid police at that time.